Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Tuesday, August 12th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today is going to be quite warm, with a high of 93 degrees and a low of 69.7 degrees. Make sure to drink plenty of water and find some shade if you're spending time outdoors. It's a day that reminds us to appreciate cooler moments. On today's program, we'll be exploring the reasons behind the seizure of control over DC police. Plus, we'll investigate the factors that are pushing U.S. inflation higher once again. All this and more as we continue with Alex's News. Stay tuned. Welcome back to your morning news. We begin today with an unprecedented situation in our nation's capital. Just yesterday, President Trump made a sweeping move, asserting federal control over Washington, D.C.'s police force and activating its National Guard. For more, we turn to our reporter, Ethan. Ethan, can you walk us through what happened?
Grace, it was quite a day in D.C. According to PBS NewsHour and North Country Public Radio, President Trump announced on Monday, August 11th, that his administration was taking federal command of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. He also deployed 800 D.C. National Guard troops to patrol city streets, following 500 federal agents surged into the district days prior.
That sounds like a massive deployment. What was the president's justification?
President Trump framed his actions as essential, claiming D.C. was overrun by, quote, violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals. He declared it Liberation Day in D.C., stating, quote, we're going to take our capital back, unquote. He cited an epidemic of crime and homelessness, aiming to beautify the capital by purging homeless people far from the capital.
So he painted a grim picture. Was there a specific incident he cited as catalyst?
Indeed, Grace. The president highlighted an alleged carjacking attempt last week involving administration staffer Edward Corristine. Corristine was reportedly assaulted on Sunday, August 3, 2025, 9 days ago, near DuPont Circle, after confronting teenagers. President Trump shared a Truth Social photo showing a bloodied Corristine. 2 15-year-olds were apprehended. Others remain at large. Trump leveraged the event, calling for D.C. law changes.
That's a powerful narrative. However, official D.C. crime statistics seem to tell a different story. What are the figures?
You're right, Grace. This is where the president's justification hits a statistical roadblock. D.C. Police and U.S. Department of Justice statistics, corroborated by multiple news outlets, show violent crime dropped significantly, reaching a 30-year low in 2024 and declining further in 2025. As of August 6th, overall violent crime was down 26%, robberies down 29%, homicides down 12%, and carjackings down 37% compared to last year. President Trump appears to have used outdated 2023 statistics.
So, the numbers don't support the president's claims. How have local D.C. leaders reacted?
The reaction from local D.C. leaders has been swift and negative, Grace. Mayor Muriel Bowser countered the president, calling the move unsettling and unprecedented and wholly unnecessary. She stated Trump was wrong about crime and questioned his motives, suggesting the real priority might be to show force in an American city. Both Mayor Bowser and Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton condemned it as an egregious assault on D.C. home rule. Despite opposition, Mayor Bowser stated the city would comply.
That brings us to a crucial point. How exactly is the president able to do this? Does he have the legal authority to take over a city's police force?
It's complex, Grace. According to Georgetown law professor Steve Vladeck, the president's actions are technically legal due to Congress's unique control over D.C. since 1801. President Trump invoked Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act of 1973, a never-before-used authority. This allows the president to place the city's police force under federal control for special conditions of an emergency nature for up to 30 days. The D.C. National Guard is also under presidential control, allowing deployment without local consent.
So it's technically within the bounds of existing law for D.C. only. What are the broader implications, especially given President Trump's past statements about other cities?
That's the real concern, Grace. President Trump himself suggested this will go further to, quote, to other cities that are very bad. Protesters in D.C. fear that if such military-style control is exerted without consent in the capital, it could extend to other communities. This action marks a significant escalation in ongoing tension between the federal government and D.C.'s efforts for greater self-governance and potential statehood.
Ethan, thank you for breaking down this significant story. It seems like a federal power play for our capital. We appreciate your insights. That was story 1 of 2. When we come back, we'll shift our focus to an exciting new development in space exploration. Welcome back, everyone. We turn now to our second story of the morning, one that's sure to hit your wallets. Inflation in the U.S. appears to be taking another bite out of consumer budgets, expected to show a third consecutive monthly increase. For more on what's driving these higher prices, we go to our economics reporter, Chloe. Chloe, what's the latest data telling us?
Grace, it's quite the sticky situation. According to reporting from ABC News and SRN News, the U.S. is bracing for a bump in July's inflation figures. Consumer prices are forecast to have risen by 2.8% from a year earlier, up from 2.7% in June. This continues an upward trend since reaching a post-pandemic low of 2.3% in April. Even core inflation, which takes out the volatile food and energy costs, is expected to climb to 3%, with some projections cited by barchart.com, putting it as high as 3.1%. That would mark the highest core inflation rate since February. Both figures, Grace, remain well above the Federal Reserve's 2% price target.
So we're seeing prices rise, but what exactly is pushing them up? Is there a primary culprit, or is it a basket of factors?
While it's never just one thing, Grace, tariffs are definitely taking center stage as a primary driver. These are essentially taxes on imported goods. According to ABC News and SRN News, the average U.S. tariff level has now soared to nearly 18%, the highest we've seen since the early 1930s. This increase in duties is directly driving up costs for items we buy every day, like furniture, appliances, toys, clothing, and even auto parts. The June inflation report, for example, already showed toy prices up 1.8% and clothing up 0.4%.
That's quite an increase. President Trump has often stated that foreign manufacturers bear the cost of these tariffs. Is that actually what's happening, or are American consumers feeling the pinch?
That's a great question, Grace, and the consensus among economists suggests a different reality. Goldman Sachs economists estimate that by fall 2025, U.S. consumers will actually bear 67% of this tariff burden. Foreign exporters pay 25% and U.S. companies only 8%. What we're seeing, according to sources like Financial Express, is that companies' ability to absorb these costs diminishes over time, leading them to accelerate passing those costs on to consumers. We've already seen major car makers like Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis absorb hundreds of millions of dollars in tariff expenses, but many other companies, from Ralph Lauren to Procter & Gamble, have already announced or implemented price increases. It's a real price hike, not just a hike in theory.
That really puts the impact into perspective for our viewers. You mentioned the 1930s. How do these current tariff levels compare to, say, the infamous Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, and are we headed for a similar economic downturn?
It's a compelling comparison, Grace. According to sharecafe.com.au and Morningstar.com, the average U.S. tariff level of nearly 18% now is indeed comparable to, and in some calculations, even higher than, the 1930s era, when tariffs on dutiable imports reached almost 60% by 1932. However, economic analyses from S&P Global and Newsweek indicate that the overall disruption doesn't yet match the catastrophic scale of the 1930s. Back then, we saw a 65 to 66% collapse in global trade and a nearly 30% shrinkage of U.S. GDP. While current tariffs are projected to reduce U.S. real GDP growth by 1.1 percentage points over 2025, and economists warn of increased recession probabilities, the world is more interconnected now, and we have greater policy tools to mitigate the fallout. So while significant, it's not quite history repeating itself on that scale yet.
That's reassuring, relatively speaking. So, with inflation rising, this puts the Federal Reserve in a tough spot. They have a dual mandate, don't they? What's the bind they're in now?
Absolutely, Grace. The Fed operates under a dual mandate to achieve maximum employment and maintain stable prices. According to ABC News and SRN News, the sharply slowed job gains this spring, following President Trump's sweeping tariffs announced in April, would typically suggest an interest rate cut to stimulate economic growth. However, Fed Chair Jerome Powell has indicated that worsening inflation could prevent such a move. This stance has reportedly enraged President Trump, who has openly demanded lower borrowing costs. The Federal Open Market Committee, or FOMC, opted to hold interest rates steady in July. This situation risks what economists call stagflation, a scenario where the economy slows but prices continue to rise. It's a very difficult tightrope for the Fed to walk.
And adding to this complexity is recent turmoil at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS, the agency responsible for collecting this crucial inflation data. What's happening there, and how might that impact the Fed's decisions?
This is a significant concern, Grace. As ABC News and SRN News have reported, President Trump recently fired Erica McIntyre, the head of the BLS, after the August 1st jobs report showed sharply lower hiring for May and June than previously reported. He's announced on Truth Social that has picked E.J. Antoni, a conservative Heritage Foundation economist, to replace her, stating Antoni will ensure that the numbers released are honest and accurate. Furthermore, a government-wide hiring freeze has forced the BLS to collect about 18% fewer price quotes for its inflation reports. Experts warn this could lead to more volatile and less credible results, potentially undermining public trust in the official figures. If the Fed can't fully trust the data, their data-dependent monetary policy becomes incredibly challenging, potentially leading to policy misalignment and market volatility. It makes the September meeting even more fraught.
Beyond tariffs, Chloe, are there any other factors significantly contributing to this rise in inflation?
Yes, Grace, there are. While tariffs are a big piece of the pie, other elements are definitely cooking up higher prices. Housing costs, particularly what's called owners, equivalent rent, which is how housing is factored into the Consumer Price Index, remains a primary and persistent driver. According to Deloitte.com, it typically accounts for about 1/3 of the overall CPI. Even with market rent growth slowing, there's a lag in how this translates to CPI measurements, keeping shelter inflation elevated. Beyond housing, we're seeing services inflation remaining persistent, influenced by wage growth. A strong labor market with unemployment potentially near 4% can lead to continued wage increases, impacting those service prices. Energy prices, though more stable than previous years, can still see localized increases. And finally, consumer demand, even if slowing, supported by income gains, can contribute. These factors together mean tariffs aren't the only ones raising the bar for prices.
It sounds like a complex web of factors. Are there any tempering forces at play? Anything helping to keep inflation from soaring even higher?
Thankfully, yes, Grace. According to ABC News and SRN News, we are seeing steadily cooling apartment rents, which eventually filter into the overall housing inflation numbers, and slight declines in new car prices. These elements are certainly helping to temper the overall inflation rate and keep it from rising even more quickly.
Chloe, this has been an incredibly insightful dive into our current economic landscape. Thank you for making these complex issues so clear for our viewers.
My pleasure, Grace.
That was Chloe with our look at rising inflation and what it means for your wallet. We'll be right back after this short break. Here are some other headlines. In Washington, it's a case of déjà vu at the FDA. Dr. Vinay Prasad is back in his post as the agency's top vaccine regulator, less than 2 weeks after his controversial departure. Prasad, a vocal critic of some pandemic-era health policies, was reportedly pressured to resign following outcry from conservative activists and a brief, contentious halt on a gene therapy treatment. But in a swift reversal, the White House reevaluated the situation. Now, with the backing of HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., it seems Dr. Prasad's career at the agency has gotten a booster shot, though his return has been met with mixed reactions from staff. Overseas, a war of words is making waves in the South China Sea. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. declared that his country would inevitably be, quote, drawn and dragged into any conflict over Taiwan, citing the nation's close proximity and the nearly 200,000 Filipino workers on the island. Beijing reacted with fury, lodging a formal protest and accusing the Philippines of playing with fire. President Marcos, appearing perplexed by the rebuke, defended his comments as simple, practical planning for a potential humanitarian crisis, stressing that hope is not a plan. The diplomatic spat comes as Manila continues to strengthen its security ties with the United States. We have a grim update from Sudan, where at least 40 civilians were killed after the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, launched a horrific assault on the Abu Shuk displacement camp in North Darfur. Activist groups report RSF fighters stormed the camp, which houses nearly 500,000 people, carrying out shelling and summary executions inside homes and on the streets. The attack is part of a brutal siege on the city of El Fasher, the last major city in the region not held by the RSF. The United Nations and the African Union have condemned the atrocities, warning that the population is on the brink of famine. In Gaza, the journalism community is in mourning after Al Jazeera correspondent Anas al-Sharif and several of his colleagues were killed in an Israeli airstrike outside Al-Shifa Hospital. The Israel Defense Forces confirmed the strike, alleging al-Sharif was the head of a Hamas, quote, terrorist cell. Al Jazeera has vehemently rejected the claim, calling the attack a targeted assassination meant to silence the press. The killing drew widespread international condemnation and skepticism from press freedom groups, who note that at least 238 journalists have been killed since the war began, creating a dangerous news void in the region. And finally, the Milwaukee area is reeling after a weekend of historic and unprecedented rainfall. Some areas were inundated with over 14 inches of rain, causing rivers to surge to record levels and leading to widespread, life-threatening flash floods. The Milwaukee Fire Department responded to over 600 calls, performing 65 water rescues of people trapped in or on top of their submerged vehicles. The deluge forced the cancellation of the final day of the Wisconsin State Fair for the first time in its history, a total washout. Governor Tony Evers has declared a state of emergency as the community begins to assess the extensive damage. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.